Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. We are from Group 6 Law3A. In this video presentation, we will present about a case of cekal berjasa sediaan berhad and Malaysian Body Society and relate the case with mandatory injunction.
If a contract is enforceable and its terms are violated, there may be significant consequences. When it is evident that the other party has broken the terms of the contract, the plaintiff has a variety of choices at their options. Remedies are the legal means to recover a right or to prevent or obtain redress for a wrong. Remedies for a breach of contract typically depend on the types and severity of the breach as well as the terms outlined in contract itself. The specific remedy pursued often depends on the nature of the breach and preferences of the non-breaching party. There are 4 types of remedies available, which are damages, specific performance, injunctions, and quantum merit. In this agreement, we will focus on one type of remedy, which is injunctions. There are 3 categories of injunction. Firstly is interlocutory injunctions, mandatory injunctions, and lastly prohibitory injunctions. We decided to choose the case of cekal berjasa sendirian berhad and Malaysia Building Society Berhad as our case study in injunctions. There are few questions could be arise, such as what types of injunction used in this case, what is the requirement for the injunction to be established, what is the characteristics of the injunctions, and lastly, what is the consequences of the injunctions. All these questions will be explained further.
Sections 50 to 55 of the Specific Relief Act cover injunctions. There are many types of injunctions available, including temporary and perpetual injunctions, obligatory and mandatory injunctions, and special injunctions and orders not provided in the Specific Relief Act, such as Mereva and AIREEN court injunctions. According to Section 51, Subsection 1 of the Specific Relief Act, temporary injunctions are orders that continue until a set period or until the court issues another order. They may be granted in any suit and are regulated by the law relating to civil procedure. Moreover, based on Section 51, Subsection 2 of the Specific Relief Act, a perpetual injunction can only be granted by a decree issued at the hearing and on the merits of the suit. The defendant is thus perpetually enjoined from asserting a right or committing an act that would be contrary to the plaintiff's right. Besides, a prohibitory injunction is an order that prohibits a defendant from acting in or continuing a conduct. Lastly, a mandatory injunction is an order that directs a defendant to do a certain conduct. Section 53 of the Specific Relief Act gives the court the power to award this injunction.
The issue that arises in the case of cekal berjasa sendirian berhad against Malaysia Building Society Berhad is whether the poor plaintiff is entitled to obtain the mandatory injunction to stop or postpone the auction on the land by the defendant.
For my part, I will explain on the facts of the case. The case involved 2 land parcels owned by the plaintiff while the defendant is the registered charger to Penangan Holding Sediaan Berhad. The plaintiff and the Penangan signed a joint venture agreement to develop the land into a mixed development called Taman Cemerlang. However, Penangan failed to pay loan payments, leading to the defendant being ordered to sell the land. The plaintiff proposed to settle outstanding amount and asked the defendant to bear the responsibility of repaying loan facilities. The defendant agreed to accept the proposal on certain terms, which the important terms be that Tiara Council Construction Sediaan Berhad financed the project. The plaintiff paid the defendant RM5,000, but the land sale was postponed. The plaintiff alternately later notified the defendant that Tiara had withdrawn from consideration as a turnkey contractor due to their inability to provide banker guarantee.
In the cekal berjasa sendirian berhad against Malaysia Building Society Berhad case, the plaintiff wanted to stop a land auction through an injunction. These agreements arose from a settlement agreement. The plaintiff claimed fulfillment, but the defendant threatened an auction. Both parties agreed to delay the auction, showing a willingness to negotiate and avoid sudden losses. The plaintiff argued about the settlement agreement. focusing on its execution, the official receiver's OR role and post-execution actions. They claim the OR's non-execution did not make the agreement invalid or show lack of consent. The court, after analysing the claim, agreed that the OR was aware of the agreement. Despite non-execution, the court considered the plaintiff's claim valid, stating the agreement's validity was not affected by the fact. The judge also examined the defendant's questionable conduct post-settlement, revealing possible breaches. This strengthened the plaintiff's case and the need for an injunction. Furthermore, the judge highlighted protecting innocent third parties, especially 907 condo buyers in a condo project. Denying the injunction could harm these buyers, stressing the need for court intervention to maintain the current situation. After assessing the settlement agreement, both parties' actions and potential consequences of denying the injunction, the court granted it. This underscores the importance of addressing significant issues and protecting the rights of all involved parties.
The defendant will not lose anything because its security in the lands remain unaltered, even if this court granted the interlocutory mandatory injunction and the plaintiff lost the case at trial. It was also contended that the plaintiff, who is the registered owner of the mentioned land, will forfeit those lands, as well as the right to develop them under the settlement agreement if the interlocutory obligatory injunction was denied. To decide where the balance of convenience rests, the judge has the authority to consider all pertinent information and assign each item the proper way, case-by-case variation occur. He undoubtedly has the freedom to consider each case on its own merits. It is the plaintiff's balance of convenience, not the defendant. The judge entirely agrees with the point made by the plaintiff's knowledgeable attorney. Hence, the plaintiff was granted an injunction emphasizing the significance of dealing with significant issues and protecting the rights of all parties concerned.
Next, I will proceed with the ratio rescindendai in this case. So, to answer the first legal issue, the first ratio rescindendai is the court found that there is a concluded contract between the plaintiff and the defendant. This is due to the fact that the plaintiff's execution of the settlement agreement on 11 February 2003, as well as their payment of Rm500,000 to the solicitors. The court later found out that the defendant acted unreasonably and or malafide in breach of the settlement agreement when it issued a notice requiring the plaintiff to execute the agreement by the OR Pinangan and deliver it to their solicitors by 2:30 p.m. on February 13, 2003. And if the plaintiff fails to do so, they will proceed with the auction of the lands on February 20, 2003, despite the same letter being faxed on February 13, 2003 at 3:14 p.m. to the plaintiff. Thus, due to the breach of the settlement agreement by the defendant, and there is a concluded contract between the plaintiff and the defendant at the first place, the court held that this shows that the plaintiff has a good cause of action against the defendant. Next, to answer the second legal issue, the following are the ratio decidendi. Firstly, the court provides that in seeking the interlocutory mandatory injunction, the plaintiff has to show that it has an unusual, strong, and clear case, and that there are special circumstances in existence warranting this court to grant the injunction. As in this case, the special circumstances existed when the defendant acted unreasonably and or malafide and or in breach of the settlement agreement with the plaintiff. That the special circumstances would certainly justify this court to grant the mandatory injunction sought for by the plaintiff. Furthermore, the court stated that the presence of the 907 buyers of condominium units in the project was the primary reasons to grant the plaintiff an interlocutory mandatory injunction. This is because surely the plaintiff would suffer greater injustice and harm if the injunction sought for was not granted, bearing in mind those innocent 907 purchasers. It was emphasized in this court that the court did not agree to grant the plaintiff. If the court did not agree to grant the plaintiff the said injunction, the rights of 907 purchaser would suffer considerably. Besides that, the court concluded that the balance of convenience belonged to the plaintiff and not the defendant. This is because the court granted the plaintiff an interlocutory mandatory injunction, the defendant would not lose its security interest in the land. However, if the injunction is denied, the plaintiff would lose the lands and the opportunity to develop them under the settlement agreements. Last but not least, the plaintiff and the defendant's enforceable settlement agreement must also be taken into consideration. The court may award the plaintiff the injunction since there was a valid agreement between the plaintiff and the defendant at the first place, and the defendant has breached the agreement. As a result, due to the above reasons given by the court, and as I stated earlier, the court decided to exercise their judicial discretion in favor of the plaintiff by granting the plaintiff in the interlocutory mandatory injunction.
Now I'm going to explain about requirements for interlocutory injunctions. The following are some general principles required in order for the court to grant interlocutory mandatory injunctions. Firstly is, in seeking the interlocutory injunctions, the applicant has to show that it has an unusual, strong and clear case, and that there are special circumstances in existence warranting this court to grant the injunctions in question. This implies that the applicant may be required to establish a prima facie case showing that there is a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits of the main case. Failure to comply with this requirement may result in the court's failure to award an interlocutory mandatory injunctions. Next, the applicant must show that there is an irreparable or serious injury in which normally cannot be compensated in terms of money. The irreparable harm means that the harm cannot be adequately compensated by monetary damages and that the party would suffer permanent or long-lasting damage. In this context, the applicant needs to show that they would suffer irreparable harm if the injunction is not granted. The last requirement for the granting of interlocutory mandatory injunction is the balance of convenience must be favor of the one seeking grant of relief or interlocutory mandatory injunctions. The court normally will weigh the inconvenience caused to both parties and determine which party would suffer greater harm if the injunction is granted or denied. If the applicant would suffer greater harm than the defendant, the court may award him with an interlocutory mandatory injunction. In conclusion, in order for the court to grant interlocutory mandatory injunctions, the applicant must comply with all the above three requirements. Failure to comply with any of these requirements may result in the court failing to grant the applicant an interlocutory mandatory injunctions. Besides that, the court will also take into account the facts and circumstances of the case to grant the injunctions.
Next, I will talk about several features of the mandatory injunction. As we know that the mandatory injunction is equitable remedy that been awarded to the plaintiff when the court found that there are wrongful act from the defendant. The court will provide a specific action toward the defendant. Thus, the remedy of mandatory injunction is legal since the enforcement being stated in the section 53 of Specific Relief Act 1950. The court may give an order for the accused person to do a certain act or to stop from doing it. Basically, the court has the power to compel the specific action for the defendant. It is either the court can prohibit the defendant continuous action or commission in belief that the defendant action will cause the harm or damage. So, several action must be taken by the court to prevent harm toward the plaintiff. It is such a positive remedy that can be taken for the part of the plaintiff. That's why the court take the positive action to give equality toward the plaintiff. Hence, this type of remedy is based on the judicial discretion of the court. Thus, the judge must consider the fact of the case, the supporting document, and other several factors that relate with the case. By looking at the facts, the court has the choice either to grant or deny the petition for the mandatory injunction.
An order that is in the effect until the final hearing is known as an interlocutory order. By doing this, it serves to shield the applicant pending the final outcome of the proceeding from harm for which it might not receive sufficient compensation in damages in the event that the claim infringement of the right materialise or persists. An interim injunction, which lasts until further order, may be prior to a final hearing, and a final injunction, which is permanent, can be distinguished from an interlocutory injunction. A mandatory injunction is an order from the court requiring someone to carry out a specific task. There are two types of mandatory injunction. The first one is restorative mandatory injunction, which aim to restore the status quo by compelling the defendant to undertake an act. And the second one, enforcing mandatory injunction, which demand the execution of a positive conduct frequently and continuously. Compared to the first type, the second one is granted less frequently, particularly during the interlocutory phase. This is due to the possibility that the person receiving the order may be subject to more obligation than if they are only told to cease what they are all doing. It is also more challenging to formulate the condition of a required injunction, such as the individual knows exactly what needs to be done. A mandatory injunction time restriction may force the court to reconsider and keep an eye on the case, something they normally try to avoid doing. Mandatory injunction at the interlocutory stage are even less frequently granted by the courts.
For analysis, the Cekal Berjaya Sdn Bhd and Malaysian Building Society Berhad case focus on mandatory injunction and their implication for parties involved. The court must protect the interests of the plaintiff, defendant or other parties involved to uphold justice and equity by considering all the relevant facts and supporting documentation before granting the injunction. The court exercised sound judgment in favour of the plaintiff, as they would suffer more loss in terms of length and the project if the court was not acting on their behalf. The plaintiff also needed an injunction due to the substantial number of buyers, which require the court to care about the buyer justice. The parties must ensure sufficient facts and proof are provided before granting the required injunction. The plaintiff successfully demonstrate the defendant violation of their agreement to give impact in terms of the financial and quality of life of the buyers of the condominium. Despite the defendant's evidence, the plaintiff's argument was stronger, leading to the conclusion that they should be granted the mandatory injunction.
In the nutshell, when a breach of contract happens, the parties who are involved should determine the remedies and consequences of breaching an enforceable contract. Injunction is a powerful tool used by the courts to maintain the status quo, protect the rights of individuals or entities, and ensure that justice is served. They provide a means for individuals and businesses to seek protections and relief when their rights are threatened or violated. Injunctions can be temporary or permanent depending on the circumstances of the case. Injunctions also serve as a vital tool in the legal system to ensure justice, protect rights, and maintain orders. Their application involves a careful consideration of legal principles, evidence, and interests of all parties involved. Since the case used interlocutory mandatory injunctions, all the three requirements of the injunctions have been fulfilled in this case, which are special circumstances, balance of convenience that lies on the plaintiff, and lastly, there is an irreparable harm which normally cannot be compensated in terms of money. The features that can be seen in this case are equitable remedies, judicial discretion, positive remedy, enforcement, compel specific actions, and prevent harm. And lastly, there will be consequences that may be faced by the parties, such as disruptions to the party being restrained, potential financial implications, and impact on the overall legal process. All the questions above have been answered in this case.